Some scars you can't hide. Not with makeup, not under shadows, not behind the thinnest smile. They sit on your face like an uninvited guest, loud and permanent, daring the cruel ones of the world to notice. For the dishwasher, those scars were an old story. Burn marks, twisted, red, jagged rivers that had crawled across his skin since childhood. A kitchen fire when he was barely old enough to spell the word flame. He'd survived it, but survival came with a price. Whispers, stares, and the kind of laughter that feels like a punch you can't block. He thought maybe this kitchen would be different. Just soap, water, and plates. A job no one noticed, hidden in the back where dishes screamed louder than people. But cruelty always finds the quiet ones. He was 21, maybe 22, with shoulders that curled forward as if he were always bracing for a blow. His name was Daniel, though most people here called him Danny. The ones who laughed didn't bother with names. They preferred nicknames that cut. It was the dinner rush at Bellamy's, the kind of neighborhood place that pretended to be fancy because the lights were low and the portions were small. In the back, fancy didn't matter. The kitchen was a metal lung, breathing steam and shouting and the hiss of oil hitting hot steel. The air was wet with garlic and lemon, onions and burnt butter, bleach and sweat. Pots rattled, tickets clipped to a rail trembled when someone slammed a drawer. It was the kind of noise that swallowed thoughts whole, unless they were sharp enough to stab back. Daniel stood elbow-deep in gray water that was once soapy and now mostly ambition. He had a rhythm that kept him alive. Spray, scrub, flip, rinse, rack. Fast enough to keep up but never frantic, because frantic hands slip and broken plates are a luxury he couldn't afford. The industrial sprayer vibrated in his palm. The hose thrummed against the sink like a restless snake. Water beaded on the scars of his right hand and rolled off oddly. Scar tissue doesn't drink water the way normal skin does. It was a small insult added to larger ones. "Oi, Danny boy," a voice cut across the clang of pans. The voice came with a grin you could hear. "You missed a spot. Careful, mate. Don't let the grease melt your other cheek." Laughter spilled out from the prep table where three line cooks leaned like they owned the night. The ringleader, Rocco, wore his sleeves tight to show the Jim had met him often. A black snake tattoo curled up his forearm and disappeared under his bicep like it was ashamed of where it lived. Next to him was Mason, tall and sharp-nosed, with a smile that never reached his eyes. The smallest one, Kyle, had a ratty face and the habit of repeating whatever the last brave man said, then giggling like it was his own thought. A fourth, Nick, loitered at the edge, watching, not joining, trying to blend into his stainless steel shadow. Daniel kept his eyes down. The water sloshed. A fork clinked against the basin. He told himself the same thing he always told himself. Don't look up, don't answer, don't give them your face like a thing to play with. Just wash, rinse, rack. Bet mirrors cry in the morning when they see you, Kyle sang, voice thin with borrowed cruelty. Bet they shatter themselves just to get away. The others howled. Mason slapped a ladle against a sheet pan like he was the drummer of a very stupid band. Rocco sniffed and tilted a plate toward the light, angling it like a mirror. "Come have a look if you're feeling brave," he said. "Oh, wait, brave's not really your thing, is it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He rinsed harder. Suds leapt, broke, slid away. The scar at the corner of his mouth pulled the way it always did when he clenched, a reminder the fire had stolen part of his smile. He didn't remember all of it, the night the apartment went bright and loud and hungry. But he remembered waking on a hospital bed with the smell of plastic and sugar in the air, and a nurse crying because she thought he slept. He remembered kids on a schoolyard pointing, and then pretending not to, teachers shushing but not stopping anything. He remembered deciding that surviving meant shrinking, and shrinking meant silence. "Pick that up," Mason said, and flicked a spoon so it bounced off the tile and spun to a stop right by Daniel's shoe. "Hurry up, clock's ticking." Daniel crouched, shoulders tight. The spoon was already clean. He picked it up and set it aside and turned back to his sink like he could crawl into it and the water might close over him and make him new. "Tell you what," Rocco said. He pushed off the prep table and swaggered across, a dish in his hand. The kitchen's overhead bulbs reflected in his shaved hairline white circles orbiting a planet that thought a lot of itself. "I'll give you something to practice with." He held up the plate like it was art. The porcelain caught the light. Even distorted by the curve, even smeared by water, Daniel could see himself. He didn't look long. You can't do that. You can't gift the enemy your reaction and expect them to bury it respectfully. But Rocco looked long. He made a face like he'd smelled something rotten and then laughed at his own invention. "Oh, mate, bet even fire doesn't want you back." The laugh that followed wasn't even human. It was pack laughter, hyenas congratulating themselves for locating the weak animal. Kyle gasped like he'd sprinted. Mason bent at the waist and wagged the plate like a puppet that said, "You." Nick stared at his shoes and swallowed and didn't say a word. The sprayer thrummed in Daniel's hand. The hose jumped. His breath shortened. He told himself to count the seconds because seconds add up to minutes and minutes add up to closing time, and closing time means dark and quiet and a bus ride home and the soft animal of a bed that doesn't ask any questions. "Smile for us," Kyle said. "Come on, give us the grin. Let's see if it cracks open." "Enough," the sauté cook muttered from the stove, not looking up, flipping scallops with the careless care of a man who'd seen this show already. But enough from a bystander is a paper wall. The difference between enough and stop is the difference between wind and a door. Rocco didn't stop. He never did. He angled the plate again so the overhead light made a halo around Daniel's reflection. "Tell you what," he said. "If you can look at yourself for 10 seconds without flinching, I'll leave you be the rest of the night." Daniel felt the hook under the bait. 10 seconds wasn't a test. It was an ambush disguised as mercy. If he looked, they'd see whatever lived in his eyes. If he didn't, they'd call him coward and keep digging. He didn't look. He turned back to his work, which was the only piece of ground he owned. "Scared," Mason said, triumphant without earning it. "Knew it." "Guys," Nick tried, and his voice cracked like a boy who hadn't picked which kind of man to be yet. "Let it go." Rocco shot him a glance that said pick a side or get run over, then leaned an elbow on the dish pit's metal lip and dropped his voice so only Daniel could hear. "You know the best thing about you, mate," he whispered. "You remind everyone they're lucky. That's your job, that's all." The words hit harder than the jokes. Cruelty is ugly. Contempt is colder. Daniel put a glass on the rack and it clinked against another, and the tiny sound felt like a bell for a fight he wasn't allowed to join. The kitchen door opened. The hinge didn't squeal, it spoke. The air that slipped in from the alley outside was a different temperature, thinner, cleaner, as if it had come from a place where grease didn't hang like a curtain. Conversations died the way candles do, snuffed without ceremony. The friar's hiss didn't change, but it sounded suddenly lonely. Bootsteps tapped against tile, not rushed, not loud, certain. Jasonstatham walked in wearing a black jacket, dark jeans, boots that had learned to move quietly on floors that remembered things. He didn't look for anyone who could greet him. He didn't scan for the person in charge. He looked at the room like a man who already knew where everything would be when it was time to move. Exits, obstacles, weak spots, strong ones. His eyes slid across steel and steam and faces and landed where they were meant to. On the 4 at the prep table, and the 1 in the dish pit they decided was sport. Rocco straightened. He was not a small man, but somehow he shrank without ceding an inch. Mason's smile thinned until it was a paper cut. Kyle's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, which is what happens when a man whose courage is borrowed suddenly misplaces the lender. Nick didn't lift his head. Jason's gaze moved from bully to bully like a metronome that had been taught anger. He didn't say it out loud, but the room heard it anyway. "Count your breaths carefully." He stepped in closer, the toe of one boot nudging a fallen slice of lemon that slid and then stopped with a tiny, shameful squeak. He wasn't a big man in the way Rocco believed he was big, but he had gravity and that weighs more. He stopped at the lip of the dish pit and looked into the water, and then at Daniel's hands in it, and then at Daniel's face, and what lived in Jason's eyes was not pity. Pity is a spotlight that burns the skin another way. What lived there was recognition, the quiet nod men exchange when they've both stood still under a storm because running wasn't an option. "Everything all right?" Jason asked. His voice was low and easy and flat as the first mile of a road that becomes a cliff. Nobody answered. The sauté cook flipped his scallops again like he'd suddenly remembered the pan was hot. From the front of house, a bell dinged softly and was ignored. Jason didn't repeat himself. Men who can end things don't ask twice. He let the silence do the heavy lifting. Silence is a pressure change. It makes ears pop and hearts miscount. He tapped 2 knuckles gently against the dish pit's rim, a sound that wasn't loud but traveled anyway. Daniel set the sprayer in its cradle and wiped his hands on his apron and made the mistake of looking up too quickly. His eyes hit Jason's and then dropped and then climbed back, because once you've looked at a man who looks back like that, you don't retreat all the way. You keep an inch. Rocco recovered first because men like him always try to. He cleared his throat and found a laugh and shaped it into words. Just a bit of banter, mate, keeps morale up. Hard night. You know how it is. Jason didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Daniel and said, "Do you?" Daniel's throat worked. Talking is harder when it's been trained out of you by bad teachers. "It's fine," he said, which is what survivors say when they don't want to make another problem out of the first one. The sentence was small, but it was shaped right. Jason nodded once, as if he'd heard all the words Daniel didn't put in it. Rocco pivoted to a different kind of power. "You can't just walk into the kitchen, yeah," he said, friendliness drilled into his tone like screws. "Health code this and that, we're busy, maybe grab a drink at the bar." Jason finally looked at him. It was not a long look. It was the kind of look that measures a distance and then decides the answer. "You keep laughing?" Jason asked softly, and somehow the softness made the room colder. "Or are we done?" Mason found his brave. "Who are you to tell us anything?" he said too quickly. "You don't work here. It's a joke, all right." He knows it's a joke. He aimed a grin at Daniel that asked for agreement and promised a punishment if it didn't arrive. Daniel didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He held still, which is sometimes how you refuse. "Go on then," Jason said, voice still even. "Let's hear it." He turned his head a fraction toward Rocco without taking his eyes off Mason. "Tell me the funny bit again. I must have missed it." No one moved. The steam lifted, curled, died. Somewhere in the dining room, a glass clinked like a tiny alarm. Kyle's fingers twitched against the edge of the prep table as if he wanted to drum and couldn't find the beat. Jason took one step closer. One step is nothing on a map. In a kitchen among knives and boys and heat, it's a change in weather. He wasn't crowding. He was making the air honest. Rocco's jaw flexed. "Look, mate," he said, and the endearment came out like a slur. "We're just kidding, all right. He's fine, he's a big lad, he can take it. Can't you, Danny?" Daniel let the question hang. He had never once been asked a question like it with the answer free to be no. He thought of being 8, of the schoolyard, of the nurse who cried, of the plate like a mirror, of Rocco's whisper about being everyone's reminder to be grateful because he wasn't them. He thought of how a life gets smaller by the millimeter until one day you turn sideways to fit inside it. He thought of the stranger who'd walked in like a weather front and said one sentence that moved the ceiling higher. "No," he said, and nothing in the room broke, but everything shifted. The word wasn't loud, wasn't brave, wasn't even steady. It didn't need to be. It was a key in a lock he'd been carrying so long he forgot it was metal. Jason nodded once, the kind of nod you save for little victories that are not little. His eyes found Rocco again. "There you go," he said. "He's not fine." The tall one, Mason, took a half step that could be mistaken for backing up or for setting his feet. Nick put a hand on his sleeve and left it there like a man holding a dog by the collar who hopes not to be bitten by either animal. Rocco tried a smile that didn't want to show up. "You got no right to." Jason raised 2 fingers, gentle, a traffic cop for a one-lane thought. "You made a show," he said. "I came to watch it end." His tone didn't rise, it didn't need to. "So, does it end, or do we carry on?" No one laughed. The fryer hissed. The sauté pan spoke in wet syllables. The chef, a real one, thick forearms and a permanent burn scar in the shape of a square pan's handle across his wrist, peeked around his expo station, took in the arrangement like a general surveying a hill, and did what very smart men do when they recognize a problem already working itself out. Nothing. Jason's gaze slid back to Daniel and softened a fraction you had to know him to see. "You done for a minute?" he asked, and somehow the question asked permission without making the permission another chore. Daniel nodded. Jason angled his chin toward the alley door. "Fresh air," he said, and then, without looking away from the boy to the room in general, "I'll bring him back." No one asked where he got the authority to decide that. Authority is a currency. Jason had it in cash. They walked to the door. Boots and sneakers, leather and rubber. The hinge that had announced him ushered them out, and the alley air set its cool hand on Daniel's hot cheek. He leaned against the brick, closed his eyes, counted 3 breaths, and opened them again because closing your eyes in front of men like those makes you smaller. "Thanks," he said, the word shy as a stray cat. Jason shook his head. "Don't thank me for turning the volume down," he said. "You decided when the song ended." "I only said no," Daniel said, and felt a stupid heat in his face because the sentence sounded so small out loud. Jason glanced sideways. "That's the hard one," he let a beat pass. "How long they been at it?" "Since I started," Daniel swallowed. "Before that too, different kitchens, different boys." "You ever swing?" Jason asked, voice not interested in a performance, just facts. Daniel let out a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "I'm good at washing, not breaking." Jason watched the alley's mouth where the street showed a sliver of neon. "You're good at not bleeding people who don't deserve it," he said. "That's not the same as good." They stood there a moment. The alley hummed with the city's low electric prayers. A bus sighed at a stop 2 blocks away. Somewhere, someone dropped a crate and swore with conviction. "You going back in?" Jason asked. "It's my job," Daniel said. Jason nodded. "Then we'll go back," he said, and the "we" wasn't casual, it was shelter. They walked inside the kitchen together, the cool air folding into heat like hands clasping. The room looked the same, but it was. Rocco stood straighter than he wanted to and shorter than he believed himself to be. Mason kept one hand on a chef's knife he wasn't using as if it were a prop in a play pausing for a rewrite. Kyle had both hands tucked under his armpits like he was cold. Nick stared at the floor the way a man studies a map of all the wrong turns he's taken. Jason moved first. He didn't look at them. He looked at the dish pit, reached for a stack of plates still wet at their rims, and handed them to Daniel. "Let's finish the shift," he said, soft, steady. Then he turned his head and let his eyes do what his tongue didn't, hold the line. "Funny, isn't it?" he said, not to anyone in particular and to everyone at once. "Picking on the one bloke who never asked for a fight. Go on then, keep laughing. Let's see how long it lasts." No one laughed. The room held its breath because a room knows when weather is about to break. And the night that had been so long already found a new kind of length, the kind that stretches thin right before it snaps.